The office had the usual hum of activity as people settled into their desks, typing on keyboards, answering phones, and talking quietly among themselves. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, giving the room a warm, golden glow that made the cold air conditioning seem a little less harsh. It was a place where deadlines mattered, where everyone had their roles, and where small tensions often hid behind polite smiles. Among the employees, there was one person who quietly stood out, not because of loud words or flashy achievements, but because of a calm, steady dedication to her work. She arrived early every day, made sure her tasks were completed on time, and never asked for extra attention or praise. Her focus was on doing things right, not on impressing anyone. Her supervisor, on the other hand, was a very different presence in the office. He walked quickly through the rows of desks, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning for errors, for anything he could point out. His reputation was well known. He had a sharp tongue, strict sense of control, and a tendency to cross lines that others wouldn't dare. People often whispered about his behavior in the break room, but most avoided confrontation. He seemed to take pleasure in showing that he was in charge, often belittling employees in subtle ways that left them feeling unsure about themselves. His criticisms were sharp, sometimes unfair, and almost always public, making others in the office shift uncomfortably in their seats. This day started like many others. The employee had arrived with a sense of quiet determination. She liked to organize her work carefully, check her emails before the office became too busy, and make a plan for the day. It gave her a sense of control, in a place where others often felt controlled. But even as she focused on her tasks, there was a tension in the air that seemed heavier than usual. She could feel it, a subtle energy of expectation, like something was about to happen. It began with small gestures. The supervisor, standing near her desk, commented on her work in a way that seemed helpful at first, but the tone carried an edge. "Are you sure that's the right approach?" he asked loudly, turning so that others could hear. Because last time, someone thought they knew better, and it didn't end well. His eyes scanned the room, making sure the words landed where they were supposed to. Her colleagues pretended not to notice, their fingers hovering nervously over keyboards, avoiding eye contact. The words weren't just a question, they were a challenge, subtle reminder that she was being watched. She took a deep breath and replied calmly, explaining the reasoning behind her approach. Her voice was steady, measured, professional. She had done this countless times before, and she knew how to remain composed under pressure. But the supervisor didn't seem satisfied. He leaned over her desk, peering at her screen, and his expression turned sharp, almost predatory. "I don't know why you're doing it that way. It seems like a waste of time. Maybe you should follow my instructions instead," he said, his voice louder now. And the corners of his mouth tightened into a smirk. The words weren't just criticism, they were meant to humiliate. Around them, the office felt smaller, as if the tension had pulled the walls closer. She felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks, not because she was embarrassed for herself, but because of the unfairness of it. She could see the discomfort in the eyes of her colleagues, the small signs of unease. Some pretended to type faster, others shifted in their seats, and a few whispered quietly, careful not to draw attention. It was a scene she had witnessed before, and it always carried the same sting. Despite the humiliation, she didn't respond with anger or sarcasm. She had learned that in moments like this, a composed response carried more weight than words spoken in haste. She nodded politely, acknowledged the comment, and continued with her work. Her hands moved steadily across the keyboard, her mind focused on the tasks at hand. But inside, a spark of determination grew. She knew that the situation wasn't fair, and she knew that there was a way to address it without causing a scene. The supervisor, sensing the calm, seemed to grow more frustrated. He moved on to other employees, making critical remarks here and there, always keeping the tone sharp, always reminding everyone who was in charge. She watched him, noting the patterns, understanding the rhythm of his behavior. It was clear that he thrived on control and on the discomfort of others. But she also noticed something else, a hint of weakness. His words, while loud, lacked substance. His authority relied on fear and intimidation, not on competence or respect. And that realization, though quiet, gave her strength. The rest of the morning passed with the usual flow of work, punctuated by moments of tension whenever the supervisor chose to assert himself. Meetings were particularly stressful. In one, he publicly criticized a report she had prepared, pointing out minor errors as if they were disasters. She remained composed, answering questions clearly, demonstrating that the work was accurate and thorough. Her colleagues began to notice, some giving subtle nods of support, others exchanging glances that carried silent admiration. It was a small victory, but an important one. She could maintain her dignity even in the face of unfair treatment. By lunchtime, she stepped away from her desk for a brief walk outside. The cool air on her face helped clear her mind, and she thought about the day so far. She knew that the supervisor's behavior was not new. He had always pushed boundaries, crossed lines, and humiliated those he considered weaker. But she also realized that this time could be different. She didn't need to respond with anger or confrontation. Instead, she could plan, observe, and prepare. There was power in strategy, in patience, knowing when and how to act. When she returned from lunch, the atmosphere in the office felt different, though she wasn't sure if anyone else noticed. There was a subtle shift, a tension that carried possibility. She sat down at her desk, opened her files, and began to review her tasks with careful precision. Every click, every movement was deliberate. She was gathering information, observing patterns, and quietly preparing for what could come next. The supervisor returned from a short meeting with a client, unaware that the employee had begun to see things differently. To him, the morning had been routine, another chance to assert control, to maintain his image. But to her, it was an opportunity, a moment to lay the groundwork for change. She could feel it deep inside. Something was about to shift. The unfairness she had endured, the humiliation she had felt, would not define her. She had a plan forming, subtle but strong. It would turn the situation in her favor without crossing professional boundaries. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with small dense interactions. The supervisor continued to make remarks, sometimes sharp, sometimes dismissive, but she responded with calm professionalism, never losing composure, never giving him the satisfaction of visible frustration. Her colleagues began to notice the contrast: her calm against his irritation, her steady focus against his sharp tongue. Some whispered quietly among themselves, realizing that there was strength in her approach, a quiet power that couldn't be undermined by arrogance or cruelty. By the end of the day, the office was quieter. People packed their bags, exchanged polite goodbyes, and left for home. She lingered for a moment, reflecting on the events of the day. The humiliation, the tension, and the unfairness were still there in memory, but they no longer felt like defeat. They were a challenge, a puzzle to solve. She knew that the next day would bring new opportunities, a chance to turn the tables, and perhaps to restore a sense of fairness and respect in a place that had long lacked it. As she shut down her computer and gathered her things, a sense of calm determination settled over her. She didn't need revenge, loud confrontation, or dramatic gestures. She only needed patience, observation, and clever action. And as she walked out of the office into the fading light of the evening, she felt ready. Ready for the next day, ready to show that dignity and intelligence could overcome arrogance and cruelty. Ready to turn the tables in a way that would be remembered, not as an act of anger, but as an act of quiet, unstoppable strength. The morning started quietly, but the air carried an unspoken tension. Everyone knew the supervisor's moods could shift without warning, and today seemed like it could be one of those days. The employee arrived early, just as usual, her bag over one shoulder and a calm determination in her step. She had thought a lot about yesterday, about how the supervisor had singled her out, the way he had belittled her work, and how the office had reacted. It hadn't been the first time, and she knew it wouldn't be the last if she didn't handle things carefully. As she settled into her desk, she noticed a few colleagues already at work, typing quietly or whispering to each other. Their eyes flicked toward the supervisor's office as he came into view, clipboard in hand, moving with the same commanding presence that had always made people feel small. He paused near her desk, glancing over the papers she had organized, his eyes sharp. "I hope today will be more productive than yesterday," he said. His tone almost polite, but there was an edge, a hidden threat, that made everyone nearby tense. The employee smiled politely, her fingers poised over the keyboard. She answered in a calm voice, "I've prepared everything carefully. I'm confident it will go smoothly." She could feel the supervisor's eyes linger on her for a moment longer than Nee, scanning, judging, as if trying to find a reason to criticize. As the day unfolded, small incidents began to pile up. During a morning meeting, the supervisor made another pointed comment about her work, this time in front of the entire team. "I noticed the report you submitted," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "There are some areas that could have been done better. I'm not sure if you understood the instructions fully." The words were sharp, intended to highlight her mistakes, and the eyes of the team fell on her. She remained calm. Her mind had prepared for this moment. She explained clearly what had guided her decisions, step by step, providing context and reasoning. Her colleagues listened quietly, some nodding slightly, others exchanging small looks of approval. The supervisor frowned, clearly annoyed that she could respond so confidently. He tried to interrupt, tried to redirect the conversation, but she stayed on point, professional and composed. And eventually, he moved on, muttering under his breath, even as she handled the meeting well. The emotional toll was there. It was draining to be singled out, to have one's competence questioned repeatedly in public. Yet she refused to let frustration or anger take control. She had learned that reacting impulsively would only give the supervisor more power. Instead, she focused on staying sharp, observing, and collecting information. She noticed patterns in how he spoke, the way he chose moments to humiliate, the subtle signs of insecurity that occasionally flashed in his expressions. Each observation was like a small piece of a puzzle, helping her understand him better. Lunch break offered a brief respite. She stepped outside for a walk, the crisp air clearing her mind. People in the office rarely spoke openly about what was happening. But she knew from quiet conversations that many of her colleagues were uncomfortable with how the supervisor treated staff. Some were too afraid to speak up. Others chose to stay silent to avoid attention. She reflected on all of it, thinking about what she could do to address the unfairness while maintaining her professionalism. Returning to the office, she noticed the subtle tension as the supervisor moved through the workspace again. He was watching, evaluating, trying to assert control. At one point, he approached another employee, criticizing a small error. The employee apologized quickly, embarrassed, and moved to correct it. She could see the pattern. He thrived on control and humiliation. But she also noticed that the supervisor's words often lacked substance. He relied on the fear of others rather than evidence or skill. That was an important insight as the afternoon approached. A new task landed on her desk, one that the supervisor had assigned hastily with little explanation. It was clear he expected her to struggle, perhaps to fail so that he could use it as an opportunity to criticize further. But she didn't panic. She organized her approach, reviewed the materials carefully, and started breaking the task into manageable steps. Her calmness and focus contrasted sharply with the supervisor's erratic energy. He moved from desk to desk, checking on others, sometimes making small, dismissive remarks, trying to maintain control, but she remained steady while working. She overheard some colleagues whispering about the supervisor's behavior. One mentioned how unfair he had been yesterday. Another commented quietly on how professional she had handled the situation. These small acknowledgments were not loud, but they mattered. They reminded her that she wasn't alone, that respect could exist even in the presence of arrogance. It also reinforced the idea that she could approach this situation strategically. Relying on observation, timing, and subtle action, the supervisor's tone grew sharper as the day progressed. He criticized small details, highlighted minor delays, and occasionally raised his voice. Each time she responded with patience and professionalism. She spoke clearly, answered questions thoroughly, and never allowed her emotions to show. Colleagues began to notice, some offering small smiles of support. Others watching silently as she demonstrated that composure could be more powerful than intimidation. By mid-afternoon, A small team meeting was called. The supervisor began reviewing ongoing projects, pointing out errors and inefficiencies. When he reached her section, he expected to see a mistake, something he could exploit. But she had prepared carefully, anticipated questions, and organized her materials. She presented her work confidently, highlighting solutions and results clearly. The supervisor's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He tried to interject, but she addressed his concerns professionally. Turning the discussion toward facts rather than emotion, the team noticed the difference, realizing that the dynamic had subtly shifted. After the meeting, she returned to her desk, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She hadn't confronted him aggressively, but she had maintained her dignity, demonstrated competence, and earned subtle recognition from colleagues. She knew the supervisor was uneasy, but she also knew that change would not happen in a single day. It required patience, careful observation, and strategic action. Each interaction was a step toward regaining respect and setting its boundaries in a professional way. As the workday neared its end, a tense moment arose. The supervisor passed by her desk again, glancing at her screen. "I'll be reviewing this tonight," he said, his voice low but sharp, implying that he expected errors. She nodded politely, replying calmly, "I've double-checked everything. It should be ready for your review." His eyes lingered for a moment, searching for signs of weakness, but found none. He moved on, leaving her with a sense of quiet triumph. Before leaving, she took a moment to review her day. The incidents, the tension, and the unfair treatment had tested her patience and resolve. Yet she had remained composed, professional, and strategic. She understood the importance of timing, observation, and subtle action. She could see how the supervisor relied on fear and intimidation, and she had learned how to navigate his behavior while maintaining respect and dignity, walking out of the office into the cool evening air. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges of the day had not defeated her. Instead, they had provided insights, clarity, and a plan for what could come next. She knew that turning the tables would require more than a single day of courage. It would require careful strategy, quiet observation, and an unwavering sense of professionalism. She was ready. The next day held possibilities. Opportunities to demonstrate competence, restore respect, and subtly shift the balance of power in the office. She didn't need confrontation or drama. Her strategy would be intelligent, calculated, and effective. The experience of today had strengthened her resolve and sharpened her awareness. She was prepared to act, not out of anger, but out of a sense of fairness and self-respect. As she left the building, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. She felt a quiet anticipation, a sense that the next day could be different. The humiliation she had faced, the subtle intimidation, the unfair treatment, were no longer sources of discouragement. They were challenges to overcome. She had learned how to maintain composure, observe behavior, and prepare for strategic action. And she was determined that tomorrow she would take a step closer to turning the tables. The evening was calm, but her mind was alert, reviewing moments of the day, replaying conversations, and noting patterns. Every detail mattered. She made mental notes on how to respond to different situations, how to handle criticism professionally, and how to demonstrate competence without appearing defensive. The quiet reflection was empowering. It transformed a day of stress into an opportunity for growth and preparation. As night fell, she rested with a sense of purpose. The supervisor's attempts to control and intimidate would not define her. The next day, she would approach the office with calm, confidence, awareness, and a strategy that relied on professionalism and intelligence. The challenges she faced today had taught her patience, observation, and subtle action. And tomorrow, the office would see a shift, a quiet turning of the tables. As she demonstrated that dignity, competence, and strategic thinking could overcome arrogance and cruelty, the next morning arrived quietly. But she felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. The events of the previous days lingered in her mind, not as sources of frustration, but as lessons. She had observed the supervisor's patterns, his moods, the way he asserted control, and the reactions of her colleagues. She knew that reacting impulsively would only reinforce his power. Instead, she had made a decision to act thoughtfully, strategically, and professionally. Today would be different. Today, she would begin to turn the tables. She arrived at the office slightly earlier than usual, just as the building lights flickered on. The air was crisp, carrying the quiet energy of anticipation. People moved about in their usual rhythm, setting up their workstations and greeting each other with polite smiles. The supervisor was already present, striding through the room with his usual air of authority. Clipboard in hand, he seemed ready to scrutinize, criticize, and command. She watched him for a moment, noticing his familiar gestures, the way he tapped his pen, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the controlled tension in his shoulders. These small details were clues, signals that she had come to understand. Settling into her desk, she reviewed her plans. She had spent the evening going over every interaction, every task, and every possible scenario. Her goal was not confrontation, not revenge, but a careful demonstration of competence, calm, and professionalism. She wanted her colleagues to see clearly that respect could not be demanded through fear, that arrogance and cruelty had limits when faced with intelligence and poise. The morning began with the usual tasks: emails to respond to, reports to check, and projects to organize. Yet, beneath the routine, she moved with a quiet intentionality. Each action was deliberate. She double-checked her work, anticipated questions, and prepared explanations that were clear and precise. Every detail mattered. She knew that small oversights could give the supervisor an opportunity to undermine her. She would not give him that satisfaction. By mid-morning, the supervisor approached her desk. "I'll need updates on all your projects by the end of the day," he said, his tone sharp but measured. It was a typical comment, but she sensed the underlying challenge. She nodded politely, replying calmly, "I've organized everything so that updates will be ready well before the deadline." Her voice was steady, her demeanor confident. She could see the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He expected hesitation or uncertainty, but he found none. While he moved on to other employees, she used the opportunity to subtly position herself. She reviewed past reports, organized her files, and prepared visual summaries that would make her work undeniable. She anticipated questions, challenges, and critiques, and she prepared clear, concise responses. Her strategy was simple but effective. Leave no room for doubt. You maintain composure, and let her work speak for itself. Around midday, a team meeting was scheduled. The supervisor led the discussion, as usual, focusing on errors, delays, and inefficiencies. When he reached her section, she calmly presented her work. She had organized every detail clearly, highlighted successful outcomes, and provided solutions for minor issues before they could be questioned. Her explanations were concise and factual. She noticed colleagues exchanging glances, some nodding slightly, others leaning forward, paying close attention. The supervisor tried to interject, attempting to highlight a minor flaw, but she addressed his point calmly, turning it into an example of her proactive problem-solving. The shift in the room was subtle, but noticeable. The supervisor, accustomed to dominance, struggled as her confidence and preparation left little room for public criticism. He cleared his throat, moved on, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a flicker of unease in his expression. She observed quietly, noting every reaction. It was a reminder that preparation and composure could change the dynamics of power. Back at her desk, she continued to refine her plan. She knew that small, consistent actions could have a greater impact than dramatic gestures. She focused on documenting her work, keeping records of communications, highlighting achievements in ways that were professional and indisputable. She also made subtle notes about the supervisor's behavior patterns of criticism, moments of overreach, and inconsistencies in his statements. These observations were not for confrontation, but for clarity, ensuring that her approach would be measured, professional, and effective. As the afternoon progressed, another opportunity arose. A project deadline required her input, and the supervisor had left vague instructions, likely expecting confusion or delay. She approached the task methodically, organizing the steps clearly and preparing a summary that could be easily shared with the team. When she presented it, it was concise, clear, and complete. The supervisor glanced at the work, his expression unreadable, then moved on quickly, muttering something about reviewing later. She remained calm, knowing that the demonstration of competence was already making its mark. She noticed that colleagues were responding differently today. There was a subtle recognition in their gestures, quiet acknowledgement of her professionalism. Some approached with questions, seeking her advice on their own tasks. Others whispered encouragement, expressing relief that someone could handle the challenges with such calm efficiency. These small interactions reinforced her strategy. Professionalism, patience, and clear action spoke louder than anger or confrontation. Toward the end of the afternoon, she anticipated a critical moment. The supervisor often used informal check-ins to assert authority or highlight perceived weaknesses. Today, she planned to respond strategically. When he approached, she greeted him politely, maintained eye contact, and provided concise updates on her progress. She highlighted completed tasks, acknowledged challenges, and offered solutions, all in a calm, measured tone. He paused, clearly searching for a flaw, but found none. Her confidence, clarity, and composure were undeniable. The supervisor moved on, leaving her with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had executed her plan for the day, demonstrating competence, professionalism, and strategic awareness. She had not confronted him aggressively, yet she had subtly shifted the balance of perception in the office. Her colleagues had witnessed the interaction, and the message was clear. Dignity, preparation, and intelligence could withstand intimidation. As the workday ended, she reflected on her actions. She had observed, prepared, and executed carefully, taking steps to reclaim respect in a professional manner. She recognized that change would not occur overnight, but she had laid the groundwork. Each moment of composure, each strategic action, was a building block toward a larger outcome. She felt empowered not because of confrontation, but because of her ability to maintain control, demonstrate capability, and plan with clarity. Walking out of the office, she felt a quiet anticipation. The supervisor's arrogance and attempts at domination had been met with professionalism and strategy. Tomorrow offered new opportunities to further solidify her position, to subtly influence perceptions, and to continue demonstrating that respect was earned through skill, patience, and composure. The evening was calm, but her mind remained active, reviewing the day, noting successes, and planning for future actions. She understood that turning the tables would require persistence, observation, and careful strategy. She reflected on each interaction, analyzing the supervisor's responses, thinking about how to handle similar situations in the days ahead. Each detail mattered, and she was determined to act thoughtfully, professionally, and effectively. By the time she rested that night, she felt a sense of readiness. The challenges of the office were not obstacles to overcome through anger or confrontation, but opportunities to demonstrate intelligence, patience, and skill. She had learned that strategic action, combined with composure and professionalism, could shift dynamics and influence outcomes. She knew that the next day could bring new moments of tension, but she was prepared. She had the knowledge, the skills, and the mindset to continue turning the tables in a way that was professional, measured, and effective. She understood that real change required persistence. The supervisor relied on fear and intimidation, but she relied on preparation, observation, and strategic action. Each interaction, each decision, and each moment of composure contributed to a larger plan. By the end of the week, the balance of perception in the office could shift, not through confrontation, but through intelligence, clarity, and professionalism. As night settled in, she felt confident. She had begun to take control, subtly and strategically, without compromising her values or professionalism. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to reinforce her position, continue demonstrating competence, and move closer to turning the tables fully. She rested with a sense of purpose, knowing that patience, preparation, and clarity were her greatest allies. The morning sunlight streamed through the office windows, casting a golden glow on the desks and filling the room with a quiet energy. She arrived slightly earlier than usual, her steps calm but purposeful. Today was the day she would begin taking subtle, meaningful actions that would shift the balance of respect and authority in the office. She had spent days observing, preparing, and planning. Every detail had been considered. Every potential move weighed. Now, it was time to act. As she settled into her desk, she organized her workspace meticulously. Every file was in order, every report updated, and every email carefully reviewed. She knew the supervisor would scrutinize everything, looking for mistakes or weaknesses to exploit. She had prepared for that. Her goal was not confrontation but quiet, undeniable demonstration of competence. She wanted her work to speak louder than his words, to make it impossible for anyone, including him, to question her. Professionalism. The supervisor entered the office shortly after, his usual brisk pace carrying authority and tension. He glanced around, clipboard in hand, scanning for errors, omissions, and anything he could use to assert control. He stopped at her desk, expecting hesitation or signs of weakness. She looked up calmly, greeted him with a polite smile, and presented her morning updates clearly and confidently. Her answers were precise, her tone professional, and her demeanor unshakable. The supervisor paused for a brief moment, clearly searching for a flaw, but found none. He moved on, muttering under his breath. She noted the flicker of frustration in his expression. The first test came during a project review. The supervisor had assigned a complex task with vague instructions, likely expecting confusion or mistakes. She had anticipated this. She presented her work clearly, breaking down each step logically, and providing visual summaries that highlighted progress and solutions. Her colleagues watched, impressed by the clarity and thoroughness of her approach. The supervisor tried to interject, pointing out minor details, but she addressed them calmly, turning potential criticism into evidence of her preparation and insight. It was subtle, but the shift in perception was happening. Her colleagues began to notice that she remained composed under pressure, that her responses were professional and well thought out. The supervisor, accustomed to control through fear and intimidation, found his usual tactics less effective. He had expected hesitation, uncertainty, and visible discomfort, but he saw none. The realization seemed to unsettle him, though he tried to maintain a facade of authority. Throughout the morning, she continued to implement her strategy. She engaged with colleagues, offering assistance on their tasks, answering questions with patience, and providing solutions proactively. Each interaction reinforced her competence and reliability. Others began to approach her with respect, seeking advice and acknowledging her contributions quietly. Her actions were subtle, never confrontational, but they carried weight. The office began to feel different, though the change was almost imperceptible at first. During a team meeting, the supervisor attempted to assert control, criticizing minor issues and highlighting perceived inefficiencies. She anticipated his approach and responded strategically. She presented her updates clearly, addressed his concerns professionally, and emphasized solutions rather than problems. Her calm confidence contrasted sharply with his sharp, reactive energy. The team noticed. Some exchanged approving glances. Others leaned forward, paying close attention. The supervisor, frustrated by his inability to undermine her publicly, moved on quickly, muttering under his breath. Her colleagues' reactions were subtle but meaningful. A few whispered quietly about her professionalism, expressing relief that someone could handle the challenges with such composure. Others began to see that the supervisor's authority was based on intimidation rather than actual expertise. The quiet acknowledgement reinforced her strategy. Demonstrate competence. Maintain composure and allow actions to speak louder than words. As the afternoon approached, another critical moment arose. The supervisor stopped by her desk to review a report she had submitted. He expected to find errors, but the work was flawless. She calmly walked him through the details, explaining each decision and highlighting solutions for potential challenges. The supervisor's expression shifted from confident scrutiny to subtle unease. He realized that her preparation had left little room for criticism. She did not gloat or confront him. She simply presented the facts professionally, allowing the evidence of her competence to speak for itself. Later, a colleague approached her with a question about a task that intersected with her own work. She offered guidance calmly and clearly, demonstrating not only knowledge, but also approachability. The supervisor observed the interaction from a distance. He had relied on creating an environment of fear, but he saw her earning genuine respect and collaboration from her peers. It was a subtle power shift, one that did not rely on confrontation or anger, but on professionalism, clarity, and intelligence. Throughout the day, she continued to take small but deliberate actions. She documented her work meticulously, organized communications clearly, and ensured that all projects were on track. Each step reinforced her reliability and competence. She also kept mental notes of the supervisor's reactions, hesitations, shifts in tone, and signs of frustration. These observations would guide her future actions, ensuring that she could maintain an upper hand without violating professional boundaries. The final test of the day came during an unexpected task. The supervisor asked her to provide a detailed summary of a project for a client meeting scheduled that afternoon. He expected confusion, delay, or mistakes. She had anticipated this. She prepared the summary in advance, ensuring it was clear, concise, and thorough. When the supervisor reviewed it, he found it flawless. He tried to comment on minor points, but her explanations were logical, professional, and complete. For the first time, he seemed genuinely unsettled, realizing that his usual tactics were ineffective by the end of the day. The atmosphere in the office had shifted subtly but noticeably. Her colleagues treated her with quiet respect, seeking guidance and acknowledging her contributions. The supervisor, who had relied on intimidation, was faced with a new reality. Her professionalism, preparation, and calm confidence could not be undermined through fear. The balance of perception was shifting, slowly but surely. As she packed her things to leave, she reflected on the day. Every interaction had been a deliberate step toward changing the office dynamic. She had maintained composure under pressure, demonstrated competence, and subtly influenced perceptions. The supervisor's tactics were no longer effective, and her colleagues were beginning to recognize her professionalism. It was not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, undeniable victory. Walking out into the evening air, she felt a deep sense of purpose and satisfaction. The plan she had carefully crafted was working. She had not needed anger, confrontation, or dramatic gestures. Her strategy relied on observation, preparation, and professionalism, and it was proving effective. The next day offered new opportunities to continue reinforcing her position and further shift the office dynamic at home. She reviewed the day mentally, replaying each interaction and noting the supervisor's reactions. Every detail mattered, from subtle hesitations to expressions of frustration. She also considered opportunities for further strategic action, thinking carefully about timing and presentation. She understood that turning the tables completely would require patience, persistence, and careful execution, but she was ready. As night fell, she rested with a sense of quiet confidence. The day had shown that strategic action, combined with professionalism and composure, could influence perceptions and shift dynamics. She was prepared to continue this approach, knowing that real change came from intelligence, preparation, and consistent, thoughtful action. Tomorrow would be another opportunity to solidify her position, demonstrate competence, and subtly, undeniably, turn the tables further. The morning sunlight poured into the office, bright and warm, but the energy inside was noticeably different. She arrived with calm determination, fully prepared for the day ahead. The past few days had been a lesson in patience, observation, and strategic thinking. She had maintained professionalism under pressure, earned the quiet respect of her colleagues, and subtly shifted the office dynamic. Today, she was ready to take the final steps that would fully turn the tables. From the moment she sat at her desk, she organized her work meticulously. Files were in order, emails reviewed, and reports double-checked. She anticipated the supervisor's scrutiny, knowing that he would look for any sign of weakness. She had prepared for this. Her approach was deliberate: maintain composure, demonstrate competence, and allow her actions to speak louder than any words. The supervisor entered the office, clipboard in hand, moving with the usual brisk authority. His eyes scanned the room, stopping at her desk. She greeted him politely, her voice calm, steady, and confident. "Good morning. I've completed the updates on all ongoing projects, and I've prepared a summary for review," she said. Gesturing to the neatly organized documents in front of her, he leaned over to glance at the papers, expecting errors or gaps. Instead, he found everything clear, precise, and well organized. She calmly explained each section, highlighting progress, completed tasks, and solutions to potential challenges. Her explanations were logical, concise, and professional. The supervisor's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of surprise and unease crossing his face. For the first time, he seemed unsure throughout the morning. She continued to engage with tasks and colleagues strategically. She offered guidance where appropriate, answered questions clearly, and presented her work in ways that were undeniable. The office began to feel different. Colleagues approached her with subtle acknowledgement, asking for advice and quietly showing appreciation for her steady professionalism. The shift was not dramatic or confrontational, but it was undeniable. Respect was being earned through competence and composure rather than fear or intimidation. Mid-morning brought a critical opportunity. The supervisor called for a team meeting to review a project that had been delayed. He expected to assert authority, to publicly criticize and re-establish control. But she had anticipated this. She arrived prepared, with all necessary data, visual summaries, and solutions to potential concerns. When the discussion began, she presented the project clearly, addressing every question and highlighting solutions before he could point out problems. The supervisor attempted to interrupt and assert dominance, but her calm responses left little room for criticism. Every point she made was factual, professional, and clear. Her colleagues noticed the contrast her composed and knowledgeable approach versus his frustrated, reactive energy. Some exchanged subtle looks of approval. Others leaned forward, engaged and attentive. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that her professionalism had earned her undeniable respect. Back at her desk, she continued to work strategically. She documented everything carefully, maintained clear records of communications, and ensured that every task was completed efficiently. She noticed the supervisor observing from a distance, his usual confidence shaken. She did not gloat, did not confront him directly. Instead, she allowed her actions and results to speak for themselves, letting competence become the quiet, powerful response to arrogance and intimidation. As the afternoon progressed, a new challenge arose. A last-minute task required her immediate attention, and the supervisor expected delays or errors. She approached it with calm determination, carefully organizing the steps, executing with precision, and preparing a concise summary for review. When he checked her work, he found it flawless once again. She explained her decisions logically and professionally, leaving no room for criticism. The subtle tension in his posture indicated he was realizing the limits of his usual methods. Her colleagues continued to respond differently than before. Some whispered quietly in admiration, acknowledging her steady approach and clear competence. Others approached with questions, seeking advice and collaboration. The supervisor, who had relied on fear and public humiliation to assert authority, began to realize that his influence over the team was waning. She had changed the dynamic not through confrontation or anger, but through intelligence, preparation, and quiet confidence. Toward the end of the day, a key moment arrived. A client requested a detailed report with clarifications on several points. The supervisor had intended to assign it last minute, expecting the employee to struggle. She had already anticipated the request, prepared the report in advance, and ensured every detail was clear and complete. When she handed it over, the supervisor glanced at the work and immediately noticed the precision, the thoroughness, and the clarity. For a moment, he seemed speechless. Her colleagues observed the interaction. They could see the contrast between her calm professionalism and his ineffective attempts to assert control. The quiet acknowledgement and respect in their expressions spoke volumes. The power in the office had subtly shifted. She had demonstrated that competence, preparation, and integrity outweighed intimidation and arrogance. As the day drew to a close, she reflected quietly on the events. The supervisor's usual tactics, criticism, public humiliation, and fear had been ineffective. Her colleagues had seen her professionalism, her strategic thinking, and her calm composure. Respect had been earned, not demanded, and it had begun to spread quietly through the office. She felt satisfaction, not from revenge, but from the knowledge that fairness, intelligence, and preparation had prevailed. Walking out of the office into the evening air, she felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose. The subtle shifts in perception, the strategic actions, and the calm composure she had maintained over several days had changed the dynamic in the workplace. She had not resorted to confrontation or drama. Instead, she had relied on careful observation, strategic preparation, and consistent professionalism. The supervisor's presence, once dominating and intimidating, now seemed less certain. He realized that intimidation alone could not undermine competence. Her actions had demonstrated that respect was earned through skill, clarity, and composure. Her colleagues' quiet acknowledgement and collaboration reinforced the shift. At home that evening, she reflected on the journey. The past days had been challenging, testing patience, resilience, and strategic thinking. She had learned that subtle, consistent action could create lasting change. She understood that the workplace was not only about completing tasks, but also about navigating relationships, influence, and perception professionally. The satisfaction she felt was deeper than a momentary victory. It was the realization that integrity, intelligence, and calm confidence could overcome arrogance and unfairness. Over the next few days, the office atmosphere continued to change subtly but significantly. The supervisor, though still present, no longer relied solely on intimidation. His interactions with her became more measured, less confrontational. Colleagues began to engage more openly, seeking collaboration and valuing professionalism over fear. Her actions had created an environment where respect was mutual. Competence was recognized. Professionalism was rewarded. She continued to maintain her approach, calm, strategic, and professional. Every task, every interaction, every communication was an opportunity to reinforce the positive shift. She did not need to assert dominance or seek revenge. Her steady actions, clarity, and preparation created an undeniable presence. Respect had been earned quietly, but firmly. The experience had taught her valuable lessons. She had learned the power of observation, strategic thinking, and patience. She had discovered that dignity and composure could influence perceptions and shift dynamics more effectively than confrontation. She had realized that preparation, clarity, and professionalism could turn challenging situations into opportunities for growth and influence by the end of the week. The office dynamic had shifted fully. The supervisor no longer relied on fear to maintain authority. Colleagues treated her with genuine respect, recognizing competence and professionalism. She had demonstrated that challenges could be met thoughtfully and strategically, without compromising integrity or values. Her journey had transformed the environment, proving that dignity, intelligence, and composure could change outcomes and inspire those around her. Walking through the office one last time that week, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had turned the tables not through confrontation, but through careful observation, strategic action, and unwavering professionalism. The lessons she had learned would stay with her, shaping how she approached challenges, interactions, and opportunities in the future. The office had been a proving ground, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and respected not through conflict, but through calm, intelligent, and deliberate action. As she left the building, the sun setting behind the horizon, she felt confident and fulfilled. The challenges she had faced had tested her patience, resilience, and strategic thinking. She had responded with composure, intelligence, and professionalism. The respect she had earned, the subtle shift in the office dynamic, and the recognition from colleagues were proof that thoughtful, strategic action could overcome arrogance, intimidation, and unfairness. Her story was not about revenge. It was about strength, dignity, and intelligence. It was about recognizing unfairness, preparing thoughtfully, and acting strategically. And it was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing that respect once earned could not be taken away.